Welcome to Sit, Stay, Read, the podcast for every wag, whinny, and whisker. I'm Kathleen Donnelly, award-winning author and retired canine handler. Each week, I chat with novelists about the bond we share with our furry friends and how they inspire stories. Grab a coffee, get cozy with your favorite pet. It's time to sit, stay, read. Well, today I'm welcoming Barry-nominated author Bruce Borgos to the show to talk about his latest release in the Porter Beck mystery series, and it's also now a USA Today bestseller, which is awesome. We're going to discuss The Blue Horse. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. It's great to be here.
I'm looking forward to this discussion because your book involves something near and dear to my heart, and that's horses. So I've been a horse girl my entire life. But first, let's talk just a little bit about the book. It was like being on a thrilling roller coaster ride. It was really interesting to go back to 2020, and I know it's only 5 years ago, but somehow that feels like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so we're dealing with COVID in the book and also the plight of the wild horse. Will you give everyone a little bit of an overview about your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, the book starts just as COVID has really landed in the United States. And the only reason I inserted it, because I realize it's kind of a triggering thing for some people, I included it as kind of a major part of the story, almost a character in and of itself, because out west, as you know, living in the West, there were places out here that handled COVID quite a bit differently than the rest of the country. And the rural part of Nevada that I write about was especially so. They were very late to the game, really, in terms of how or if they should react at all to COVID. They were not a big area for masking or for taking really any other major precautions. They did somewhat later, but they had a unique way of looking at COVID and the way the government was handling the response. So I thought it was important to continue. So it's it's in the book. It's um, taking place the whole time the story is unfolding. Um, but the book itself is really, as you mentioned, at least the backdrop for the story is what's happening with wild horses in Nevada. And a lot of people who don't live out west, first of all, don't have any idea that there really are wild horses in the United States, that we have any left. We actually do, and they're really all in the western states. And the majority of those wild horses actually live in Nevada. Over half of the wild horses are in Nevada, and by the counts differ depending on who you talk to, but maybe as many as 40 to 50,000 wild horses in Nevada alone, and maybe 70 to 80,000 in the rest of the states. But it's a big problem also, in that the more people we have, the more we come into contact with wildlife, as we all know. Sometimes those things conflict. And wild horses also conflict with the cattle and the sheep industry, and they're wanting to graze that land without anybody or any other animals, conflicting with that. So it's a major hotbed political issue, has been for a long time, and I just thought it was a really good backdrop for a story because it's a real thing that's going on currently. Mm-hmm. And the horse roundups themselves it can be somewhat violent and cruel. Mm-hmm. I think the government's certainly trying to do the best that they can with these things, but there are very heated emotions on both sides.
For sure. And, to talk more about the Mustangs, I remember when I saw my first Mustang, I was actually at a horse show, and there was this big, beautiful black horse, and everyone was just drawn to him. I was a kid, so I was really drawn to him. But he just had a presence. He had a special thing about him. And it turned out he was a Mustang out of Canyon City, which is our prison system that has a program to help bring the Mustangs in. And I'll just never forget the spirit of that horse. So I'm curious, when did you see your first Mustang and what was that like for you?
I was actually researching my first book in the series. This is the third book in the series. The first is called The Bitter Past. And my wife and I were up in Lincoln County, Nevada, which is where my story takes place, and driving around just to get kind of the lay of the land, and saw several wild horses. She's also a photographer, so she got
Oh,
out, took some
cool.
pictures. Um, but to see those horses in the wild is a different thing. And again, a lot of people don't know much about the history of the horse in America. Horses actually originated in what is now the United States thousands and thousands of years ago. When I was a kid, we always heard about, well, they were really from Europe and the Spaniards brought them over here. That's not the case. They originated here, and because of a number of events, migrated thousands of years ago to East Asia, and then eventually into Europe and other places, and then eventually came back here. So it's a little bit ironic that they came back here and to some extent became wild again. Um, but yeah, when you see them in the wild, it's quite a different thing.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the wild horse is every bit, if not more, a symbol of the American West that than the cowboy is.
Mhm.
And we should be very mindful of that. But quite honestly, I'm a little afraid that after doing all the research for this story and writing about it, interviewing people, that I'm not sure the wild horse is going to survive.
Yeah, yeah, and it is very controversial. We have them in Western Colorado, but like you said, the majority of them are living out in Nevada. And uh, I thought you did a great job in the book of really showing all sides of the issue through all these different characters' eyes. And I was like, wow, this is beautifully done because it's hard. It's hard to know that helicopters are rounding up the horses. As a horse lover, that's hard for me. So I'd love to hear a little more about that research and if you've witnessed a roundup, because there were some scenes that made me wonder if you had witnessed one. So,
Yeah, I'm glad you think I was fair about the issue. I tried to
mhm.
be. My protagonist in the story and the series is a sheriff by the name of Porter Beck. And he's an interesting guy. He's got a lot of interesting
Yes.
skills, and he's got some problems he's dealing with as well. But as he himself said in the story, um, I'm agnostic about this issue. My job is to follow the law. I tried to, as the writer, be agnostic as I started the research for this story. And my wife's the horse person in the family.
Okay. Okay.
Um, she's got and has had horses forever. Um, so I've always been around them. But I interviewed, obviously, a lot of people on both sides of the issue, both with the government and those people who are attached to the government's policies, whether they were wildlife biologists or water management, resource management people, um, and those kinds of folks. And then I interviewed lots of people on the horse advocacy side. And as I mentioned, those are some pretty serious emotions that are taking
Mhm.
place on
Yeah.
both sides, because everybody thinks that they're right. Um, quite honestly, the way I came down Kathleen at the end, and this is really mostly due to the fact that I researched the heck out of this and spent so much time talking to people, and even some people I ran into on the government side conceded some things to me that I was a little surprised by, specifically about the fact that the government has this number of wild horses that they consider to be ideal for the range,
Hmm.
for for federal land that they're managing, and they call that the appropriate management level, or AML. But I had one biologist who had been testifying in front of the Nevada legislature on this issue, who conceded to me that, because I asked him, I said, what's the formula for the AML? And he just kind of laughed and he said, there isn't one. We just kind of came up with a
Okay.
number. Um, and I think that you that didn't turn me against their position. I understand their feeling that wild horses need to be managed so that they don't become a nuisance to people, or
Mhm.
they don't become a danger to people who are out there using federal land, and they really don't use up all the resources out there that other animals might need as well. But um, it seemed obvious to me after a while that the government's position is weak in some areas, especially when you consider how large the state of Nevada is. Nevada's like the sixth or seventh largest state in the union
Okay.
by area, and about 80% of the land is federally owned. There is so much room for wild horses here. It's unreal. So for them to create an artificial number, which I think is what they've done, some kind of arbitrary number, and then try to manage to that number, I think is a little disingenuous. There's no question they would disagree with that.
Yeah.
But and like I said, I understand their position, and the people I spoke to on the government side are very smart people, no question about it. And I appreciate their position. By the end, though, I just kind of came down on the side that I think you guys are a little bit too interested in maintaining good relationships with the cattle industry.
Mhm.
Cattle industry has a lot of lobbying money that flows into Congress. Even though Western cattle only account for about 2% of all the beef that's consumed in the United States, we still feel a need to uh, to really, you know, I guess bend over backwards for the cattle industry at the
Yeah.
costs and the price of wild.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating because I'm with you. I've always wondered, you hear about Nevada and Wyoming and the millions of acres of public land and uh, for these horses, for all the wildlife. And so that's really interesting what your research. Did you find out anything else unusual or unexpected in your research? I mean, that right there is pretty unexpected, but
Well, I've learned a whole lot, obviously, about different ways and the different schools of thought about of how to manage wild horse populations. One of them, which I think is particularly promising, is darting the horses with a drug that's going to impact their fertility. So you can control their numbers by having volunteers go out, track these horses. And if they stay on track, giving these horses kind of, their booster dose when they're necessary to control the populations, because left unchecked, there is no question that wild horses will
yes.
duplicate very quickly.
Yeah.
But like I said, I learned a lot of interesting things I hadn't known before about horses, especially wild horses, and how they behave, in a herd, and what they're likely to do. If you've never seen a wild horse roundup, what I would suggest to the folks watching this is go online, go on YouTube, and Google, or put in the search bar wild horse roundups. The first thing you
Okay.
will see, as you mentioned earlier, is a bunch of horses running through, a very remote area, being chased by a helicopter.
Mhm.
That's what the government uses now to chase and what they call gather wild horses, which is a fancy name for a roundup. But these horse or these helicopter roundups often result in injury and or death to some of these horses that are being chased. And you have to remember that horses are herding animals and they run from danger first. And
Yeah.
when you got a very noisy helicopter flying above you and very close to you, you're running literally for your life.
Yeah.
And it might be an efficient way to gather those horses, much more so than the way we used to do it on horseback or even on
Mhm.
ATVs. Um, but it can be cruel. And I know the government tries to minimize the damage and the injury to horses, but it does happen and it happens frequently.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely tough. And there's another tough scene in the book, but I believe it's based on a true story. You can tell me if I'm right. And that's where, unfortunately, some of the wild horses were fatally shot. And I believe I heard a story about that happening in maybe even in Colorado, but I'm sure it's happened in several states.
It's probably happened in a number of places. And the reason for that primarily
Mhm.
is because, again, people who are in the cattle industry, who run cattle ranches, don't like wild horses.
Yeah.
Um, horses are not pets to people who maybe use them to run cattle. They're tools. They're like a shovel.
Mhm.
And that's how they see them for the most part. Um, and and so wild horses infringe on the grass that their cattle eat. So they're a pest. They're a nuisance to people in the cattle industry and to the cowboys who are managing them. So there have been instances in the past, and I do mention one in my story that happened right outside of Reno a few decades ago, where
Okay.
a number of wild horses were just massacred, just shot to death by people. And unfortunately, at that time, even though it was illegal then and still illegal now, obviously, those people got basically off scot free. I
Okay.
think they had to pay a
Wow.
fine. I think some of them served a few days in jail. But there was not a lot of love for wild horses out here in the West, except for people who really just loved horses for
Mhm.
what they are and wanted to preserve the wild horse in its environment.
Yeah, yeah. I think the Reno uh, case you're talking about is the one I'm thinking of. And I wish your wonderful character, Porter Beck, had been the sheriff of that area because I really enjoyed him as a character. He has a way of observing and taking things in. So let's talk about him a little bit. He's got a lot on his plate, including night blindness. I found that really interesting. I thought I've never read a character with night blindness. How fascinating, especially because a lot of investigations, end up being overnight. Or so is he based on anyone you know, or how did Porter Beck come about?
Well, he's loosely based on somebody I know, meaning the real sheriff of Lincoln County at the time that I researched the first book anyway. But I created him after I created the idea for my first story, which was a dual timeline story, The Bitter Past, which takes place partly in the 1950s when the United
Wow.
States was developing and testing all of its atomic weapons in the Nevada desert, detonating them above ground, which, and I think most of us in the country have heard about the effects of that downwind radiation exposure.
Mhm.
So part of the book is about that and the Soviets' attempt to infiltrate the Nevada test site. But when I created
Interesting.
that storyline, I also wanted a half the story to take place in the present day. So I needed somebody who could investigate what was currently going on and tie that back to events in the 1950s. So I just kind of came up with this idea for Porter Beck, who is uh, a person who has recently left the Army after a career in Army intelligence. He's been all over the world. He's extremely intelligent. He has some unique gifts, like
Mhm.
if he's ever been in a conversation with anyone, or privy to a conversation or heard anything, maybe a song on the radio, he is unable to ever forget exactly that that conversation or that song.
Wow.
It's stuck in his head. So on the one hand, it's a blessing because he can
Mhm.
recall anything. On the other hand, it's a curse. Sometimes you have bad situations in life, and he not only cannot forget those things, he remembers them exactly as they took place, even the hurtful things. So that's one of the reasons I called the book The Bitter Past. Um,
Yeah.
but um, he also, as you mentioned, suffers from night blindness. And I did that because I wanted a character who was relatable to readers, but also was not a Superman and had some obstacles to overcome. And so I started to think about, gosh, what can I inflict on this guy that's going to be particularly
Mhm.
hard for a law enforcement officer? So I gave him a very real degenerative progressive eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which is commonly referred to as night blindness. And that means that the rods and the cones in his retinas are gradually deteriorating so that while
Okay.
he can take in light and process it correctly during regular hours, the daytime, or in rooms with good lighting, when it gets dark he can't see at all, and that's a very
Wow.
real thing, and generally it results in total blindness over a period
Wow.
of decades typically. He's fortunate that it didn't start affecting him until his early 1940s or early 40s. And that, of course, caused him to be booted out of the army,
Mhm.
and go home. And that's where he took the job that his father had had as sheriff for over 30 years. So he kind of took that job because he didn't really have any other thing to do. And they asked him to do it. And he's got some good skills and some good investigative experience. But yeah, he's kind of a unique guy, and I really like him.
I did too. He was a great character, and you're definitely rooting for him. I mean, all your characters were really unique. I enjoyed them all. And another four-legged character, my personal favorite, besides the horses, because I have a black lab named Boomer.
Yeah,
So when you put in the black lab named Bo, I was like, oh, well, I'm sold. This is great. But what I love is Bo helps investigate, but he also is a little bit of a seeing eye dog, which I had to laugh because my Boomer would be the worst seeing eye dog ever. So I love that Bo is actually helpful for Porter.
yeah. I think that Porter Beck, um, first of all, Beck tries to do everything himself. He's kind of a do-it-yourself guy, and he lives out in the
Yeah.
middle of Lincoln County, which is a long way from everywhere. So there's no school he could take. His idea was, okay, I'm gonna get this dog. Maybe I can train him to be a guide dog for when eventually I do
Mhm.
go blind. Because he picks up the dog in the second book in the series at
Okay.
a at, just after he's flunked out of the canine guns and ammo school in the Reno PD.
Okay.
So while he's got some skills that in that area, they didn't think he had enough focus, so they flunked him. And Beck picked him up for literally a song, and he thinks, well, okay, the dog's got to be smart. He can do a little guns and ammo stuff for us at the department. And meanwhile, I'll train him to be a guide dog. But like you said, Kathleen, like your black lab, Columbo is not probably the best suited to be a guide dog. And
Yeah.
so the early attempts that Beck makes in book two to train him are somewhat painful, because he's wearing a blindfold while he's trying to teach his dog to take him around obstacles and things like that, but it's not very successful. So he's an interesting character, and he's very loyal, and he does have some
Yes.
really good skills.
He does. He does. I really enjoyed it. And I'm gonna have to go back and read book two. I
Yeah,
kind of jumped in and everyone should know I just jumped into the third book and it stands alone great on its by itself. But I definitely it makes you want to go back and start from the beginning. So I'm
yeah.
gonna do that. Another character I really enjoyed, I mean, I enjoyed all of them, but Charlie Blue Horse. And I had to laugh because I was looking at your website and I saw you also have a golden retriever named Charlie Blue Horse. And then Beck's love interest and fellow investigator is Charlie Bluehorse. So I'm curious, who came first, the fictional character or the golden retriever?
Well, if you had to guess, who would you say?
I would say, ooh, I at first I was going to say the golden retriever, but I almost feel like the character came first. So
You're absolutely right. So in the second book, Shades of Mercy, I wanted to give Beck a developing love interest. It's somebody he um, specifically was working with on this particular case. So I came up with this idea of a Paiute detective who works for the state police. Also a very sharp, very seasoned investigator,
okay.
has his same kind of sense of humor and understands his jokes and um, but 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 is a she's much more of an investigator, much more trained than he is, and he recognizes that very quickly. So while Charlie is a continuing character in the story in the series, my wife and I ended up we didn't want to get another puppy. We had lost our yellow lab a couple years
Okay.
ago, and it was really tough to get over. And finally, after 3 years, we started talking about getting another dog. And one thing we said was, we're not getting a puppy because God, it takes so much training and time and everything. And so, sure enough, one of my wife's cousins sent her a video one day and said, "Oh, the people down the block from us," and that was here in Utah. Just had a litter of golden retrievers and sent us pictures, and we're going like, "Yeah, they're cute, but no." Um, And then we kept getting pictures, and after a while, we just said, "Okay, let's go look at them." And then, of course, we ended up taking one home. So Charlie, I named her because we couldn't, we're trying to think of names, and we picked up a female dog. I said, "Well, I got a great female character in the book. Let's name her Charlie Blue Horse." So that's what we do. That's what we did, and that's what we call her. And she's not yet two, but she's a great dog.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I really enjoyed that. And I thought it was fun when I read that on your website.
Mhm.
Uh, there's some other great characters I just want to touch on really quick that really start. I mean, the whole department has some great characters, but Porter's father and sister, I would love for you to touch on them just a little bit. They're really fascinating characters.
Yeah, so Pop is Beck's dad, and at the time of the Blue Horse, he's about 90. He's been suffering from dementia, which, as we all know, gradually gets worse, or sometimes
Yeah.
very quickly gets worse. But he's 90 already, has lived through an awful lot in his life, including 30 years as sheriff of Lincoln County. But he's got, this very kind of smart ass sense of humor about him, and a lot of totally understand who he's talking to. The dementia is at that point in his life, but he's a really great character in that he knows everything about the county, um, and even in his dementia, especially if it's something from long ago, he can remember it very
Yeah.
vividly, and can be a help. Um, and then who was the other one? Was a toughie that you mentioned?
There's Tuffy, but then Porter's sister. She was Brinley. She was very
Oh yeah. So
fascinating.
Brinley, as it turns out, when I talk to my readers, and I always ask them a favorite character, they always say Brinley,
Yeah.
because Brinley is Beck's adopted sister. So Pop adopted her when she was very young, I think about 10 years old, and he had rescued her from a very horrible situation, living off grid in the mountains with her drugged out alcoholic father who would beat her and abuse her in any number of ways. And her mother was never really in the picture. So Pop rescues her, brings her home, eventually keeps her and adopts her. And Beck becomes very early on, he's somewhat older than she is, kind of her protector and somebody that she learns a lot from. But Brimley, because of her background and her history, um, she knows very early that the last thing she's ever going to let happen again is for someone to abuse her. So what she does is she learns everything about guns that she possibly
Mhm.
can. And she ends up knowing more about guns than anybody Beck knows, including all the guys he served in the Army with. And she has a better shot than just about anybody that he's ever met. So much so that she currently works in the film industry on movies as, your firearms consultant, or training actors or A-list celebrities how to use a gun, and gets paid handsomely for it. She has her own YouTube channel. She makes money hand over fist. And much more than her adopted brother makes. Um, so she's a very interesting character, and she is always Johnny on the spot for him.
Yeah, yeah, I really enjoyed her. I'm with your other readers. She was one of my favorite characters. So, what's up next for Porter and Charlie? You left some interesting things open. I don't want to say, I don't want to have spoiler alerts, but what's up next for them?
Well, as you mentioned, at the end of the Blue Horse, and I won't mention those things here either, but I'm always trying to keep the development of all of my major characters going. And as you mentioned, there's a number of them out there. So I'm trying to continue their lives as we all do. We all
Yeah.
develop and we all have things happen to us. And Charlie and Beck are no different. Brinley's no different. Um, so what's next is that in the fourth book, which I've just finished the third draft of,
Nice.
still a little bit of work to be done, where he's pointed to a body that's been hidden, um, in a place not far from him, and that's been there probably going on 50 years.
Okay.
And so what happens is it's the start of a story that's about a serial killer, and
Ooh.
and somebody who's taken a personal interest in Beck, and the entire book is really him trying to track this person down. So
Oh.
that's what he and Charlie are up to. And there's a lot going on in their personal lives at the same time that they're trying to do this. And there's some experimental eye stuff that Beck is going to undergo in that
Oh,
book,
very cool. Okay.
to see if that might help his situation. But yeah, everybody's kind of living their lives and trying to do good things.
I love it. Oh, I look forward to that. That sounds good. Well, on a completely different note, I had to laugh out loud when I was reading your bio on your website, and it said you were told you would not become an astronaut, which I thought there's a good story behind that. Would you be up for sharing that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's an important story, really, and that's the reason I put it in the bio. And it's true. So I don't know if they still have these classes, but when I was in high school, way back, I can't remember what they called it, but you basically spent a semester trying to figure out what you want to be. And at the time, foolishly, of course, when it came my turn to be asked what do you want to be, I said an astronaut. And I remember distinctly how the teacher just looked at me and said, "You're never going to be an astronaut." Like,
Oh no.
like first of all, like he really knew me
Right.
or had an inkling of who I was or what I was capable of doing. And I remember thinking, well, I wasn't too serious with my answer anyway. But who are you to say that I can't do this? And I
Yeah.
know from his standpoint, he was probably trying to make it realistic. Like, hey, maybe he knew more about me than I did. Um, but I remember thinking, you just don't have any business telling somebody they can't do something.
Yeah.
And I remember that as I started my journey in writing. And it's something I always look back on because in writing, especially, you're going to run into any number of people, as you know, Kathleen, along the way, who
Yeah.
give you the sense or tell you outright, maybe this isn't something you were meant to do.
Right.
So that kind of feedback is unfortunate, but maybe it's also necessary because if you use it as a motivator, and say, well, I'm gonna prove you wrong, then it becomes a great tool for you, and that's kind of how I've used it.
Oh, I love that. I love it. And it's true because there are a lot of people who will tell you that being a writer is just not going to happen or this or that. And you're right, it is motivating. So I love that
Yeah,
story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
you bet.
I'm curious, where can readers best connect with you, find your books, monthly newsletter? Do you have all that stuff?
So fascinatingly, you and I have the same website developer.
We do.
Yeah. So
Love her.
yeah, our websites are very good. So if you like websites, you can go to my website at bruceborgos.com. And you can catch me on almost every social media. I'm on X, it used to be Twitter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Threads to some extent. And I'm pretty active in those places. I post several times a week, generally about what's going on with my books or somebody else's books. I try to keep my social media time spent on those things. Um, but for my books, you can find them on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or pretty much any bookstore that you go to. They will have them available. So yeah, you shouldn't have any problem finding them.
Great. Perfect. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been
And
such a pleasure for me. I seldom get the chance to talk about the animal part of this whole thing.
yeah, no, it's been great. And again, everyone, it's The Blue Horse by Bruce Borgos, and it gives great insight into these beautiful Mustangs. Yep, we both got our copies. So these beautiful Mustangs that inhabit Nevada and other areas of the West. And until next time, keep your tails wagging and pages turning. Thanks for joining me today. Sit, Stay, Read is a part of the Authors on the Air Global Network. If you enjoyed today's author interview, be sure to leave a review and share the episode with a fellow animal-loving reader. If you're curious about the world of working dogs and wilderness adventures, please check out my books at KathleenDonnelly.com. Until next time, curl up with your best furry friend and sit, stay, read.